Welcome to another DragonLance Saga creator episode. My name is Adam, and today I'm talking with the talented story architect and forever DN, John Christian. He creates and coordinates the design of the organized play adventure path Dragonlance Vault of the Undying Adventure. Before we get into it, I would like to take a moment and thank the members of this YouTube channel and invite you to consider becoming a member by visiting the link in the description below, and remind you can always pick up Dragonlance game materials using my affiliate links also in the description below. John, how you doing, man?
Doing well. That is so well rehearsed, by the way. I'm so jealous. As someone that produces content and as a host myself, I mean, it's usually like an exercise in buffoonery whenever we're opening up. So it's good stuff. Doing well, though.
Usually how it works. This is a little bit smoother intro than traditionally. But,
I'm notorious for it, for stepping in it.
Yeah. Jeff, Chris, thanks for joining live. Anyone else joining us through the course of this, of course, if you have any questions for John about anything, go ahead and throw them in live in chat, and we'll sort of address them as soon as we have an opportunity. We do have a lot to talk about, though, because this is a Dragonlance channel. You are a Dragonlance aficionado, so let's just sort of have a little bit of fun. Now, I know you've done a bunch of these type of interviews about specifically this series that you've been putting out, but I want to do a little peek behind the curtain because I am not personally familiar with you. So can you give us a little background about, where does your passion for fantasy derive from, and ultimately how you got into Dragonlance?
Oh, well, where it came from and Dragonlance, it's like the perfect intersection because that's where it all started. I was in 8th grade, and the first fantasy book that I really read from cover to cover wasn't like The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, or the Chronicles of Predain, or the typical entry points that a lot of other people would get. It was Dragonlance for me. I started with Autumn Twilight, and within a week, I went out and bought Twilight, Winter, Night, and Spring Dawning, all within the same week, and devoured. That's pretty much all I did. It was in the middle of summer, and I was at camp at the time, and I talked my camp counselors into letting me read the entire time. I remember sitting there was like a dance at the very end between the guys and the girls, and they were super awkward. Guys on one side, girls on the other, and I'm sitting here like I'm cracked open Spring Dawning, and I'm super into it, and all my buddies are like, "Come on, man, somebody needs to go up there and dance." I'm like, hang on a second, Raceland just came in with the black robes, and there's something's happening right now. So yeah, that's
so
what it's always
just swimming in panties, basically.
Oh man, it was great. Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah,
when everyone else was like being chased by Jason Voorhees, you were just in the corner, safe and sound.
I was the safe nerd. That's exactly what I was until I watched Nightmare on Elm Street 3, and then I was like, we're all really in a lot of trouble. So.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh, that is such a great reference too.
Thank you.
I'm not sure many people. I have no idea how old you are, but sort of our generation, I'm going to just sort of assume. That was a seminal Nightmare on Elm Street. Like the first one, I don't want to get off on a tangent, but I'm just going to.
I'll just do it. That's all right. I'm all about tangents. Let's go. I'm ready.
Like the first one was a genuine horror film. I mean, Freddy was introduced as sort of a little bit scary. The second one was a little bit strange because, the direct overtones, and I actually do enjoy the sort of movement it made for a lot of people in recognizing LGBTQ sort of individuality and stuff like that. But I always thought it was awesome just because of that scene where he jumps out of the ground at the pool party. He's like, "You're all my children."
Yeah.
But 3, because I was a D&D geek at the time, just him being, "When I sleep, I'm a wizard," or whatever the line was.
Well, I think what killed me about that movie, and I think that's easily my favorite Nightmare on Elm Street, is because it was the first time that the tables got turned. I mean, Nancy at the beginning in part 1 turned the tables on him, but there was an entire group of teenagers that had all been terrorized by him for who knows how long, and it was this what do they call it? They call it lucid dreaming, right? Where this whole you're aware that you're asleep, and because you're aware that you're asleep, you can do whatever you want to and manipulate the dreamscape, so to speak. So yeah, man, I loved that between like all of them. That whole as soon as they went into the dream realm and they kind of got their superpowers or whatever it was like super empowering for people that had been terrorized by somebody for so long. So that I think it spoke to an entire generation, honestly, and that's why it's probably one of the undersung fan favorites of the series.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. And then just the one-liners and that nurse scene.
Gosh, man. I mean, like Robert Englund.
He's amazing.
The man's I love how much he loves it too. He's so generous, and so like I've met him a couple times at different conventions, and he's always so available and appreciative, and he puts up with a lot, honestly, out of the fan base. It's great.
Because we're obsessive and crazy. I mean, you
Well, I
can't get
mean,
around it.
that's what happens when you're a fan.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's the
Well,
same way for me. Anytime that I meet Margaret or Tracy,
yeah.
it's like that. I don't get really lathered up. I don't get nervous. I don't get starstruck or anything like that. But for whatever reason, Tracy, not so much. Tracy's like, it's easier to approach him for some reason, but I always get super weird around Margaret. I'm a big fan. Thank you.
I start
love
doing the
you.
robot. I don't.
I do like to thank you. I don't know what it is. I just like my arms just flail and go akimbo.
Right.
Awesome.
Well, welcome to the Fandom Podcast, everyone.
Hello. Here
Where
we
just
go.
cover every topic.
That's right.
So I mean, you were introduced as a young man. You sort of devoured at camp, Dragonlance Chronicles. I think there is a sort of a seminal moment in most people's youth where they see, in the similar, a lot of adult males will just sort of latch on to an era of their life and just sort of live that for the rest of their life.
Sure.
Fantasy seems to be one of those things where it just sort of sinks its teeth into you at a young age, and it doesn't ever really let go. Like I've met grown men who know about Dragonlance from their youth, and then we can just sort of riff about old, Chronicles events, like decades and decades later. So it's just one of those things that really does latch onto you. Are there any other fandoms, in the fantasy genre, other than Dragonlance, that really pulled you in like that?
So I'm an 80s kid, right? So I'm a Gen Xer. So I cut my teeth. The first fantasy books that I read were Dragonlance, but pretty much any of the sword and sorcery films and from that era, Conan,
so good.
Willow, Dark Crystal, Labyrinth. I mean, you name it. All of this, Ice and Fire, not Song of Ice and Fire, but Ice and Fire. All of those movies back then, I still love those. Princess Bride. I mean, you name it. Any of like the big fantasy films of the 80s, I really loved. I think that I love the Wheel of Time series. It's really verbose. Right, it's like it's 1,200 pages that really could be condensed into like 600.
Yeah, Robert Jordan goes on.
He does, but I mean, I'm all over the place. But I think that really my niche, like for you, like my formative years, really started out while I was in the 80s. So all through the 80s and probably early 90s, there's a lot of pop culture in there that I still really gravitate towards and love. And then one of the gifts that you have when you're passionate about that pop culture era is you can introduce another generation to it. So between my kids and people that I meet, like these next generations, like Gen Z and millennials and stuff like that are not familiar with a lot of that stuff, it's like this weird. It's almost like camp to them, camp access as opposed to nostalgic access for the rest of us. So isn't that for them? It's like there's a novelty to it. Whereas for us, I love it so stinking much. But
sometimes I do kind of feel like that weird, creepy guy in the trench coat and like New York streets or subways, and I like open the trench coat and it's just like fantasy books instead of anything else.
Yeah, Dragonlance is a lot like that for me. Where, like I said, I stream with some friends of mine ever since we did the pandemic, and so for us on the show, of the three of us, one of us knows nothing about Dragonlance. Another guy's like, he read a couple of books whenever he was younger and he really liked them, but he wasn't like into them. He was more of a Eberron and Forgotten Realms kind of guy. And then me, foaming at the mouth, like super, super fan for Dragonlance. I get a lot of weird looks and a lot of jibes at my expense for my fandom. But I'm proud, loud and proud with it. So
well, I'm always curious about sort of the trajectory that it takes, because you went from being simply a fan and playing games and sort of indulging and sharing that passion with other people to creating on behalf of that fandom. What was that turning point for you, and was there ever a point where you're just like, should I really be doing this?
Oh yeah, every day. Are you kidding me? Like every single day. How is it me? I think it's like the thing you ask yourself. Yeah. So how it kind of came about was I'd been a forever DM, and I'd ran games for 30
Hopefully you do
years. Yeah, right. But here's the thing. Let me park on that just for a second. Forever DM is one of those things that I think that we softly lament in public, but we really like, at least for myself, I love being a DM. I
Yeah.
really do. And
Yeah.
I get weird and awkward at the table whenever I'm playing because I just don't know what to do with myself. There aren't enough characters and plates for me to spin and things like that. So I love being a forever DM. But that's essentially where it started. And then again, pandemic happened and some opportunities opened up. I started doing a lot of organized play, running games for organized play. I got involved with the folks over at Baldwin Games who do the lion's share. We'll say like 80% of the organized play stuff for big conventions like Gen Con, Origins, PAX U, you name it, PAX West. They're there and they're running D&D all weekend long. And I got really involved, helped out with the committees that were there. And then what ended up happening is they knew Dragonlance was coming out last year, at the end of last year. And Wizards of the Coast had effectively said, well, we've given people what they wanted. They've been asking for Dragonlance for a while, and here it is. And then that was pretty much it. They decided that was as far as they would take it. And now they're going to hand it off to the community. And so Dave Christ, who owns and it's like the primary operator at Baldwin Games, said, well, hang on a second. What are you guys? Are you doing anything for organized play at all? Any official WotC organized play? And they said, nah, not really. We're gonna. The community can do whatever they want with it. So he's like, well, give it to me, and I'll be a premier organizer for it, and we'll put out official Dragonlance content through the organized play system. As soon as I got wind of that, I was on it. And they actually, what the good thing was that my name came up because of what a huge fan I've always been. And not really necessarily just a fan, but like I've written quite a bit before then, and I'd organized quite a bit before then. And so I had the chops for it, but I also had the passion to make it happen.
Let me ask you about organized play, because as someone who's always sort of just hung out with friends in tabletops or dark alleys talking about fantasy away from everyone prying eyes, I've never done organized play. I don't know anything about it. It's completely new to me. The whole Adventure League itself is a confusing concept for me. So for the layman's like me, can you please explain what's the difference between just the game and then organized play?
Yeah, that's a great question. So organized play, it does a really good job of segmentizing adventure, in that each time that you sit down at the table, the typical expectation is you're going to play between 2 and 4 hours. Adventures are really built around a 4-hour play schedule, and so the organized
the entirety of the module is just
right, exactly. Well, and you could have like a series of 10 adventures, but they're in 4-hour bites.
Okay.
And so a full campaign arc would be run through over the course of 10 4-hour adventures. Oh, wow. And the main reason why they do that is for whenever you run games at a friendly neighborhood game store, anything that's in the public, right? Conventions, they do a virtual weekend through Wizards of the Coast now, where if you can't get access to a table or a DM, you can buy a ticket just like you would go into the movies, sit at a table, and you'll have a really great DM and have a really great experience that you can then select for yourself. Like, I want to play in this adventure and with this dungeon master. And then you kind of develop a relationship with that dungeon master over time too, in the virtual weekend setting at least. So you can go back to them over and over and over again and kind of develop this like a rapport for repeat access, right? And so the organized bit of it is that we're all going to play the same adventures together, and when we do, we're going to have a really similar, but not exact experience. There's still DM empowerment, and players are going to zig whenever you think they're going to zag and things like that. Yeah. But 90% of it's going to end up being, or I'd say really more like 75% of it is going to be pretty much the same 4-hour adventure as we sit down together. And that could be spread across 3 or 4 different tables inside of a game store, or it could be 20 to 30 tables at conventions like Gen Con or Origins and things like that.
Do you think, as a DM, are you able to inject enough personal character building with the players in an organized play setting?
It's tough. So when you start out with I've got a lot of experience with actually running games in organized play. And that's really, it's a tough thing to do because you have this bite-sized game and bite-sized relationships with people that you have at the table. You'll have 6 seats plus the dungeon master, and those 6 people may not know each other at all, They may have two that know one another, or you may have a whole table of 6 people that know one another intimately and have played with one another a lot. Trying to develop a relationship between these other disparate people, and then like trying to incorporate their characters in a meaningful way that isn't just like, and here you're sitting on the adventure rails and go, is really, really tough. It's very tough, and it's definitely a different experience than what you're going to see at a home table.
Yeah.
It doesn't bake or breathe as much. It's really just, we're going to sit down and we're going to have an adventure, and we're just all, there's some kind of like some expectations at the table of like, we're just going to be really cool with each other, and our characters are going to get along. Because if they don't get along, really what that's going to do is it's going to make it harder for us to actually complete the adventure, because there's so much other character friction over here that we can't really get anything done. So there's like an expectation of cooperation at the table for a lot of these things, and that's something that I think that develops over time. Within the first like 3 or 4 sessions of you sitting at an organized play table, you kind of get that. And I think that it's kind of like, if nothing else, it's definitely an unwritten rule at the table, is that we're going to all get along because we're all here just to do the same thing, and that's just have a good time.
Yeah. So coming to the table in an organized play scenario is very much, I am here to join in this community experience of focusing on this adventure module and just dealing with this.
Yes.
Not so much developing out my character and seeing the relationships form and bringing in backstory and really just sort of seeing where the game goes. We're going to complete this thing.
Yeah, well, it depends too. Like there are some situations where you've never come to a game store before. You want to sit down and you want to play D&D, and it's very much like that. Or you could have the same group of people that meet every single Wednesday, and they're going through the same adventure series, like Vault of the Undying or Dreams of the Red Wizards or the Moonshades stories. And so you may have that experience where you'll have development over time. It really just depends on when people onboard into the adventures and how long they stick around.
Okay.
For a organized play, like at a convention, there's this thing called the D&D experience, where you can have a table that you sit at and you purchase like 4 adventures in a row that are all associated to one another, and that are kind of like all in a line, and you're going to play with the same group of people with every single adventure. So over the course of the week, you're going to have 16 hours at the table with the same other 5 people plus the dungeon master that's running it. You might be able to develop a little bit more of a rapport and relationship and have some more character development over that. It just kind of, again, where you sit, what you're playing, and what the circumstance is specifically. And then that makes it tough whenever you're writing adventures for things like that to build those kinds of things in. But we have some tips and tricks on how we do that.
So what draws you to an organized play versus just friends at a table?
I prefer friends at the table, personally, right? Organized play, though, is about people that don't have access to it on a regular basis most of the time, or for us that are the forever DMs. Every once in a while, we do want to actually sit down at the table and play a game with our buddies. If we're going to go to Gen Con or Gary Con or something like that together. And so it gives us the availability to park our dungeon master responsibilities for at least for the length of the adventures that we're gonna play in. So what it really does is create some alleviation for the dungeon masters to play some stuff, and then for the players that just can't get access to a game or get to a table, it's almost a guarantee that if you go to some of these larger conventions, you're going to find a seat, you're going to be able to play, and it's just not going to be, you're not going to have the home game experience, right? And then also, I think really to organized play acts as a really good avenue for new players to come into it, which was one of the reasons why I was so excited about Dragonlance in particular, because I wrote it very much in an homage and for like a love letter to the setting that I've adored for 20 plus years. But what I really want is I want to onboard as many new people as possible into it, because I want other people to love it too, right? And so so organized play is a really good avenue to do that. They've never played D&D before. They want to try it out. Dragonlance, I don't know what that is. That's the Lances and Dragons. Sounds like that's a good combo to me. And then
is it
you
a
just
jousting game?
Right. Well, I'm sure that there are some people that are like, why am I not flying a dragon yet if they've never played D&D before, right? But yeah, I think that's another thing too. Is just it acts as a really good vehicle for new players to get in and experience Dungeons and Dragons in a very in a non-committal way, right? I'm going to try it out, see if I like it. And if I don't, I can step away from the table. And my friends that have been trying to get me to play it for the last 10 years are not going to be mad at me.
It seems antithetical almost that would be an avenue for first-time players. I mean, it seems like you would go to your local hobby shop, or you would just meet friends
Hmm.
online, or just friends that you knew from junior high or something,
Yeah.
and learn through them. But to go to like an organized place like a con, for example,
Hmm.
that seems for me wildly intimidating. Is it real that you do get a bunch of like new people, or is it
We get
just
a lot.
primarily old school?
Yeah, the main reason why we do is for smaller towns that don't have a huge player base, or they don't
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of people that are super excited about it. You may be the one person at your high school that's actually super excited about D&D or trying it out, right? Or you
Mm-hmm.
just got the box set, but you don't know where to start. And there are a bajillion videos out there on how to do it. You got Matt Colville telling you to do it one way. Everybody's telling you to do it like Matt Mercer over here, and you don't really know what your own play style is, and you just want to you want to learn. So it's a
Yeah.
really good place for you to go and learn how to play D&D
Okay.
too, because a lot of the DMs that we've got that are run for, at least for Baldwin at the Herald's Guild in particular, are really that's what we're built around. It's not what we're built around, but it's one of the skill sets that we hone,
Mm-hmm.
and that is new players at the table, teaching them how to play as we play, so then we're not spending a half an hour or an hour teaching them the crunch. We're
Yeah.
just doing it as we go along and kind of pointing to the different areas of the character sheets and going over the basics of here's is what role play actually is. We're just going to play pretend for the next
Yeah.
4 hours,
Yeah.
and no one's going to feel bad about or feel silly about doing weird voices and making funny faces
Yeah.
while we do it.
Okay. I got a question here that I'm curious about as well before we dive into the Adventure League project that you've been working on.
Hmm.
Um, what do you think about sort of comparing and contrasting the original DL modules from AD&D to D&D 5e with
Mm.
Shadow of the Dragon Queen? Do you have any personal relationship with either of those? What do you think of them?
I love the originals for what they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think they're a product of the time, right? And I think both are a product of both the time and the place where Wizards of the Coast, or TSR at the time, where
Yeah,
they
yeah.
were in the kind of in the zeitgeist, or in in the gaming sphere. And I think DL1 was just like a wild experiment, is really what it was. This was what was wildly new to them, to create this a series as large that would create this expansive world, that and with what Tracy and Laura came up with whenever they came into Wisconsin was unheard of, right? Putting something like that together.
Yeah.
I think the contrast between the two, though, is that I think Wizards of the Coast had decided that there was enough material out there. This is more of a guess than like actually educated guess than
Yeah.
like definitive or authoritative answer. But I think with the Shadow of the Dragon Queen, they said people want Dragonlance, we'll give them Dragonlance, but we're not going to give them any more than is absolutely necessary, because there's scads of books that are already out there, and there's decades of material and lore that's already out there, and we don't need to add to it. We're just going to add an adventure, and we're going to bolt on a bit here at the very beginning to get people started and get them hungry or curious about things, to where they can go and delve into the other materials that are out there on DM's Guild, or if you want to buy it on eBay or something like that. But I think it was born out of it was more of like a tactical decision in the way that they did it. Now, as a Dragonlance fan, I want 500 books, and I want everybody that's on them to be really passionate about the setting, and
Right, right.
I want more, more, more. But that's me. So I think they probably are reading tea leaves that we're not aware of as to why they went the direction they did with it. I think that we've gone more the illusion of a sandbox in the modern era,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to in DL1 through 16. With all of those, it's like people knew that they were on rails and they were fine with it. Whenever they're sitting down and they're playing it, it's like they're gonna be in Star Wars, and they're gonna play Han Solo, Leia, and Luke, and or Boba Fett even, or Lando, right?
Yeah.
They knew they were gonna play these characters. They're not my characters. They're somebody else's characters that somebody else developed, and we're gonna follow this through line that feels very much like we're just replaying. We're playing through a scripted film, as opposed to now, where there's like you have to have custom characters, and like I said, the illusion of choice and verisimilitude, and all those catchphrases that we use and terms that we use these days to kind of make it feel like it's a sandbox. So preferences over one over the other is, I think there's like anything in life, it really is, it's something in between.
Yeah.
I think anything that we play is going to be a railroad, whether we want to admit it or not, because otherwise it's just an exercise in improvisation. You're in a tavern, and we're just going to guess at everything. And I've done that before, but it's also exhausting
Mm-hmm.
sometimes. And so every once in a while, having like a planned out, like I know what the scene is going to do, and I know what it's supposed to serve, and I know what this villain is supposed to serve to the story, and how this is important, and it's forecasting something else down the line. So it's I think again, for preference for me, organized play is very much riding the line on trying to create an illusion of a sandbox, but it has to be on at least some form of rails because you got 4 hours to get something done.
Yeah.
And it's pretty tough.
So for the adventures that you've been writing and sort of architecting out, those are that sort of 4-hour consumption type formats.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, the first adventure that we wrote, that I wrote, was Dragons of Divinity, which was a 2-hour prelude to the actual story. And it was a take it or leave it. And the way that I wrote it specifically was to write, it was a jump point into the main story that we were trying to tell, but it was also a jump point into pretty much any Dragonlance adventure during the War of the Lance. It's like, here, this is how we all got together. And we were walking on the road to one another, and here's a thing that happened while we were along the way, and it propelled us into the actual events of the War of the Lance. So that was intentional to be like, you could use it for Shadow of the Dragon Queen. If you're running through DL1, you could probably use it to some degree, and then it really helped out for propelling for our stories.
So for your involvement, I'm curious, is it the passion of organized play and wanting to put something together for those types of tables, or is it after Shadow of the Dragon Queen came out, you wanted to do organized play for Dragonlance specifically?
It was really, I wanted to do anything that I could to be involved with Dragonlance. That's the God's honest truth. I mean, like, I was already in organized play, and whenever the opportunity presented itself, it's one of those things where, like, I remember whenever I worked at a place once, and we had a couple of folks come in for interviews to be a manager. It was before I was in leadership, and the interviews with the manager that would be the people that would be my manager didn't go the way that I wanted. So I eventually said, well, I'll just go for the management position, because I don't know that I can trust anybody else to do it, and not that I can't trust anyone else to actually write the Dragonlance stuff for organized play, but I know that if nothing else, I've given it everything that I possibly can to owe an homage, and, like I said, a love letter to the setting, and then giving it 100%, and making sure that the people that I'm working with are really passionate, really talented people that are writing the adventures too. So the fact that it was Dragonlance was like the main thrust of it. Organized play was just a medium or a vehicle for doing it.
Yeah. And are the modules, like you had mentioned that the first one, which we're going to get into, specifics, well, a little more specifics than we have, being vague as we have, is it all meant to be a prelude to Shadow of the Dragon Queen, or is it meant to be sort of companion to it?
Right. It's a great question. Whenever I was first presented with it, I thought that it needed to be tightly coupled with it. But then the dialogue that we had back and forth with Wizards on how much freedom that we were given to actually, how big was the sandbox that we could create, or the playground that we could create. It starts out at the same time that Shadow of the Dragon Queen does, early 351 AC. So it's like the opening salvo of the Vanguard campaign, and it runs in parallel to it for a while, but it's elsewhere. It doesn't overlap. It doesn't intersect with anything that happens in the hardcover book, but it's kind of like, while all this is happening up in the north, this is what's happening in the south of Solamnia.
Yeah. I'm always interested when it comes to the development of modules and campaigns in general, because when I when I think of Dragonlance, I mean, you have those grand epic scale scenes that you want to be involved in, and they used to use those with Battle System, or now they have Warriors of Krynn, which I actually enjoy a lot. But you also have those really intimate moments between different types of characters with different sensibilities. And that, for me, is the strength of Dragonlance.
Yeah.
So when I try to craft stories or try to help shape backgrounds for characters and you sort of interweave them with modules, I really fall back on that sensibility side of it, where it's, for example, Sturm is not a knight, but he's not telling anyone that he's not a knight. He's just living the knighthood. That's a character choice that is not easy. It's been informed by the incredibly difficult lifestyle that he has had, informed by his mother and the choices that his father had to make because of the sort of the fallout of the Cataclysm, and the sort of interpersonal relationships with all the friends and companions that he's dealing with. The choices that he makes are not easy. They're not even always right for the moment, as far as living a long life. But it's true to his character. And I think having choices like that or having situations like that really flesh out the drama of Dragonlance, which I think is
Yes.
the incredible backbone of what Dragonlance is, or why Dragonlance is successful in general. So when you're crafting adventures, and I know you can't do this because you're going to be handing them off to every individual, DM, and their players are going to bring their own whatever. But how do you balance that sort of micro personal expression of the character via the macro grand war side of it? I mean, are you even focusing on that, or are you just hyper focused on here are the story beats we want to hit?
No. I think that like any good film, I'm a big film buff. Again, 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
Like I fell in love with pop culture and films, and the best ones are the ones where they have the characters that you're rooting for. The NPCs to me are, and the characters that are not the player characters have a critical importance too, because they're part of what are going to connect you to the game or to the story more so than just the events that are happening. You can have neat environments with like lots of flashy encounters and scary monsters and things like that. But if you can create a character that's inside of there that people root for and want to come back for, and if something bad happens to them, that they're affected by it, or something good happens to them, then they're affected by it. I think that's the best way that I know how to really engage people and pull them in. Even I'll use Divinity as an example. Like the knighthood is really important, and so one of the things that happens very early on is there is this expression for both old players are going to know it, or old fans are going to understand where the knighthood is during the War of the Lance, and the state of decay that the knighthood is in, and how sad that really is. And so then each of the characters are kind of expressing and representing the state of the world while the staging point of the war is about to happen. So there's like Sir Jacelyn Uth Shannon is a character who is similar to in some regards to Sturm in that Sturm doesn't really understand exactly how far the knighthood has fallen, so to speak, away
He
from
has
the
no
open
idea,
event.
yeah.
Right. But whereas Sir Jacelyn knows, and is more of a, not a rabble rouser or a rebel necessarily, but she wants to see the knighthood go back to its roots, so to speak, or she understands like what Sir Whiston or Gunther, Sir Gunther did whenever they refreshed the Oath and the Measure at the end of the War of the Lance. She sees the writing on the wall that that's something that needs to happen, and so she's an advocate for the knighthood to go back to its roots, and so that's a part of that's like for her story expression comes. That is expressed from her story and from her background of like, here's where the knights are. And so we give a lot of, go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt
No,
you.
you're good.
Do you see the irony in that? Like a female knight wants to go back to the roots of the knighthood when females were not allowed to be in the knighthood.
I know, exactly. I know. And that's one of those things where it's that's another like modern era Dragonlance thing that was handed in where the sensibilities of the modern era changed, and we were asked to incorporate more. And we did.
You were actually directed to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so it's one of those things. It's one of those things where I tried the best that we could to make it a Ripley, an Ellen Ripley, or a Sarah Connor, as opposed to they earned the place that they were in, and she is an oddity.
Yeah.
In the knighthood, and more like something that was not tolerated, I guess, more than anything else, as opposed to being. And there's actually an element in this where there's like the weirdo wing of the knighthood that's led by Sir Emmon Bray. I say weirdo, right? Like he is essentially he has gambled his reputation on what he believes the future of the knighthood is going to end up looking like, right? Whether it's through Destina Rosethorn, we're kind of seeing that in the new Dragonlance books that are coming out from Margaret and Tracy, or if it's what ends up essentially happening at post-War of the Lance is females were allowed into the knighthood anyway. He sees the forecast of that, and then Jacelyn is essentially part of that gamble of bringing her in. And not necessarily protecting her, but protecting her ability to be a part of the knighthood, whether other people like it or not. And then that friction is important in the story too.
I like that. I like that there's friction. I mean, part of what I think was so impactful about Dragonlance in the time that it came out, and why I would like to think that so many people sort of resonate with it, is because it presented a world that was very much like our own. You know, there is racism, there is bigotry, there is
Yes.
sexism, and unjustifiable hatreds
Hmm.
based on society and culture and et cetera. So learned behavior.
Hmm.
So Dragonlance did this thing where they presented the world as it is.
Hmm.
Like if all the Whitestone forces could get along quickly, they would have overrun the Dragon Army
Right.
immediately, and it would have been not a real dramatic situation.
Hmm.
But the fact is, they held on to these biases
Hmm.
for so long, to the literally the very knife's edge of the very bitter end, before they actually, you know, sort of did a unified front, or as unified as it got to be. The strength of it, my long-winded way of getting around to it, is that they individually overcame those biases.
Yes.
If
Yeah.
you start from a position where there are no biases, then
Yes.
there's nothing, no inner conflict to get through. There's no joy on the other side. There's just, we're in a war, let's win the war.
And that's
And
where
that's
some of
not
the
Dragonlance.
And that's some of the, yeah, I agree. And that was one of the places where we kind of diverged from the book, right? It's like when you see in Vogel, not to like spoiler alert for everybody, in Vogel, there's kind of like a more of a happy-go-lucky, everybody gets along mentality, which was really out of place for Dragonlance. And whereas in Divinity, the majority of this is like this setup of people don't trust one another. They don't like one another. They don't like. It's not about just dwarves versus humans, or there's inner conflict within the dwarven clans between the Hylar and the Thewar, and the Agar are never getting their shot and things like that. And so it's not just one nation against another. No one trusts anybody because there have been 300 years of despair and famine, hardship, and people going without. So no one trusts one another with their resources or with their own lives, and so there is a disparity between them that's beyond just like the looming threat of war from monsters on the horizon. One of the big components in Lemish is one of the kind of like the forgotten elements to the War of the Lance, where you have the Lemish forces in the south of Solamnia they're all saboteurs and assassins and infiltrators and things like that. And so in Divinity, spoiler alert, one of the things that happens is there's an element where the Lemish are trying to soften the belly of the Solamnics before the forces come out of Throttle. The hobgoblins and the goblinoids come out from the east and into the west, and they start that Throttle Gap conflict. And so they're softening the belly, and the way that they're doing it is they're trying to create as much division as possible between people in Solamnia. And so the kind of the main through line that I developed from the very beginning, part of the division statement, if you will, is that one of the things that I loved the most about Dragonlance, around the original 3 books, is that it was a group. The Fellowship were weirdos. None of them should have liked one another. None of them should have loved one another. They should have hated each other and distrust one another, because some of them had pointy ears, some of them had top knots with hoop hacks, and some of them were tall, some were short, and things like that. So all these things that were disparate about them should have separated them. But over the course of the books, what you find out is that, thank goodness, they loved one another in spite of their differences. They either learned to tolerate one another or accept one another. Because those are the things that made the difference in the fight between good and evil, and light overcoming the darkness. Was about not redempting the group necessarily, but the individuals within the groups, and saying that learning to accept one another for what we are, and then moving beyond that towards a position of bigger fish to fry. And so that's one of the things I've really loved about the through line of the original trilogy that I'm trying very, very hard to incorporate into this. It's really about uniting. Like, we can't do this if we don't trust one another. And everything's going to try to push us apart, everything. But until we learn to like there are certain things about you that I don't like, and I'm going to accept. The acceptance is that I'm not going to try to tell you that you're evil for it, but you're not harming me. So, but there's something else that's bigger, that's a bigger nasty that we have to deal with together. Let's unite against that thing, and then we'll cover the rest of it later on. But we're going to cover it from a place where there's no inherent animosity towards the other person just because of the differences.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, the strength of the promise of the future is that you do now have this shared experience of being side by side.
Yep.
against a shared opposition. And
Yeah.
and though, in Dragonlance that never works out anyway, but it's
Right,
nice to
yes.
have that moment and that hope, because ultimately that's really, I think, what these stories are about.
Yeah.
Well, I love that you're sort of pulling back those sort of lizard brain elements of Dragonlance and sort of tiptoeing that line. There's another question here about whether, through the conversations you had with WotC, do you think that they're willing to support the setting in the future beyond Shadows of the Dragon Queen or the Adventure League modules that you're putting out?
Right. I would say, from what I know, nothing in this current iteration of D&D. I'll leave it at that. Like with this, whatever they're going to end up calling the next version of D&D, whether it's a 6E 55575 or 1 D&D or whatever it's going to end up being.
It's going to be called Sparkle.
Oh my gosh.
That's
yeah.
it.
D&D Glimmer.
It's just,
something like that.
It'll just be glitter.
It'll be something like, well, and that's one of the things we talked about before is like, whatever they want to call it, the community is going to call it what it's actually going to be called.
Yeah.
Effectively. Right. So, but anyway, I digress. I think that they've essentially said, we gave people what they wanted. They wanted Dragonlance. Here's your Dragonlance book. We even gave you a, miniatures, and we gave you a board game. And then they're probably going to push it away from the table. I don't know when they're going to bring it back up, honestly. It really boils down to how successful any of this is. If the organized play is probably, aside from the hardcover book, it's the only other thing they're really looking at outside of maybe DM's Guild. DM's Guild is like, you have to have like the ecosystem of writers that love this stuff, and if it's successful there, or if it's successful in the hardcover form, they're not going to have any choice but to get back into it. So, and like one of the things, as much as there are things about Shadows of the Dragon Queen that I'm not really a big fan of in regards to the canon or how close it is to the originals or things like that, there's a part of me that's like, it still needs to be successful in some capacity, because the more successful it is, the more likely we're going to see more Dragonlance in the future, and it's not just going to go into hibernation in a cave for the next 20 years.
Hey, I feel lucky as a Dragonlance fan, to be quite honest, because Spelljammer fans are up in arms. Ravenloft fans weren't very happy. It doesn't seem that Planescape fans are going to be entirely thrilled. I got a board game for War, and I got actually a really decent adventure.
I thought it was good too. I'll go ahead and I'll say it here. I enjoyed the hardcover quite a bit. Like I said, it's not exactly what I'm familiar with, or what feels like there are certain things in it, like in the timelines, that don't make sense, like with the way that Soth is incorporated into the war and when and things like that, or where Dalamar is and all this other kind of thing. But it was still a good adventure. I was actually part of the playtest
that's awesome.
about a year before the book actually came out, and I was just tickled.
Fault.
It is my fault. Look, I'm one voice man. I did what I could. All right. I liked it. I really do like it. I've got every single version of the cover. I like it that much, and I like I got the Beetle and Grimm's version of it and stuff like that. So
part of it's also, I mean, you're like me, a Dragonlance crack addict.
Yes, it is really is. It really is. It's just a problem. My wife is so patient. I love her so much. I know. Yeah.
All right, well, let's get into and I just wanted to sort of, for definition's sake, Adventure League is just the organized play nomenclature for WotC, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was originally like RPGA,
right,
back in the day, and it was Encounters during 4th edition, and it's just a rebrand. This is the 5e branding for organized play, Adventurers League. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about Dragonlance Vault of the Undying in a little bit more specifics. You were kind enough to share some imagery with me, so I want. Oh, see, and I'm already off on my thing here, so let's try to get back to where we once belonged. See, and I should have gone forward instead of back. See, this is everything, everyone.
This is all of it. There you go.
All right. So Vault of the Undying, when you first sort of conceptualized what this was, I mean, what are you looking at? Are you looking at 4 different sets of adventures? Are you looking at 10 adventures like you had mentioned for a campaign? I mean, what's the scope?
It's 12, and it's 12 adventures. And so here's the other thing. Organized play enjoys one thing that is very much different from the home. You cannot do it to home games. I mean, you could maybe, but there's a mechanism for doing it, and that's multi-table events. So imagine, if you will, at Gen Con, in a ballroom with 16 tables, 6 Dragonlance fans at each table, and a DM running a table. and it's think of it like a World of Warcraft raid where you are all trying to accomplish the same thing together in parallel at different tables. So the one of the first adventures as Dragons of Destruction is an epic. That's what we refer to them as, this multi-table event. And so there is in order to because the great thing about Dragonlance is that it's a war. It's a world at war. So these multi-table events make a lot of sense for this setting and for this story, because there are these large-scale battles that are going on where 16 times 6 number of players playing at the same time feels really, really big. And these really, really big events are a blast. Where I started with all of this, though, kind of where I kind of the genesis or the seed for the story was, I had to ask myself, who am I really writing it for? Am I writing it for me? To a degree, I mean, I would be a liar if I didn't say I was writing it for myself. But I think part of it is, am I writing it for the diehard fans or for new fans? And what I had to decide was, I'm writing it for new fans, but I'm going to show as much love and I want to honor the people that have helped carry the torch all this time, right? I think there's a level of respect that needs to go there for the fans that have held out through the dark ages of 4E, where we got absolutely nothing and everything else behind that. So the nucleus of it was, I want to bring on board as many new people as possible. So the story it's 12 adventures long, but it really is about almost creating playing the greatest hits from the DL1, or really from the books, right? Not almost like a shot for shot remake, but and I hate to use this analogy, but like The Force Awakens, right? One of the things that people just beat the snot out of The Force Awakens over is that it felt like they just redid the entire first trilogy, the original trilogy, right? So it's in that vein of like the reason why they did that, though, is because there were like 2 generations or a full generation past that had never been exposed to Star Wars, and they needed to we needed to onboard people into it and show them the really awesome stuff without making them go back and watch movies that were like 40 or 50 years old, right? So with this, there are elements of this that will feel very much like the original trilogy of books, the Chronicles books, but very, very distinct in and of itself. And it's going to be in an area that is an underrepresented area in the books, and even in a lot of the adventure modules and things like that too. They're going to be covered for the lore and the geography of it.
Okay. Well, as far as like the scope goes, you're going to make, you said it was 12, was that right?
12. Yeah, 12. We've finished. We have 8 that have been premiered.
Oh, wow.
Yep, so far.
So I only saw 2 on DM's Guild.
Yeah, so that's a good distinction. So the way that it works is, because this is kind of a back end, kind of pulling the sheets up a bit, is that we write them, and then each adventure it premieres at a virtual weekend. And that's almost like it's like an open playtest even, really, because we take a lot of the feedback that comes from those virtual tables that are being run, and we'll make some adjustments to the adventure, and we'll do some iterative updates. We do our own internal play testing first before it goes out, but then we take player feedback, DM feedback, and we'll make some adjustments that make the most sense. So what you see with the 2 that are out right now, they were premiered back in December of last year, but they've been played over the course of the last year in virtual weekends through Baldwin Games, at Gen Con Origins, Gary Con. They're going to be played at Gamehole Con. They were played at Winter Fantasy, so they're being played out there. All the first 4 actually have been played extensively, and the next 4 have been played quite a bit in the last 3 or 4 months. But they're just essentially like they haven't gotten into the editing, layout, and design and readiness for publication on DM's Guild yet. Right. That's starting to come out now, though.
So when you say virtually, I mean are you using a virtual tabletop to do that?
Yes, so they play on usually Roll20, Foundry, whatever the DM's preference is, or with the kind of couple with the player preferences. A lot of times when you do a virtual weekend, the virtual weekend is essentially just like, here are all the games that DMs are going to run. Here are the virtual tabletops that they're going to end up using, and there are 6 tickets to be purchased at each one. And here are the times and dates that you can play each one of these games at.
What's your preference for tabletop?
Roll20. It's the one that I cut my teeth on. Whenever when the lights went out and we went, it was the pandemic. That's the one that I had already used, and each one of us in the Herald's Guild, which is kind of like a subcontracted group, right? Baldwin Games uses the Herald's Guild as for its for all the GMs that run games for them.
Okay.
And so each one, there were like 3 or 4 of us that said we need to become experts in these tabletops. There was like Owlbear Rodeo, Roll20, Foundry, Fantasy Grounds, you name it. And I ended up getting Roll20, so I got really proficient with it, macros and all that kind of good stuff.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's touch a little bit on. Let me hit my right key here. DragonLance Divinity. So this is the first one that you guys put together. You'd mentioned earlier that it's sort of, you're hitting some familiar notes as some of the early novels. How are you trying to separate this? Well, I guess this is the first question. Are you trying to separate it in tone, in feel from Shadows of the Dragon Queen and everything else that came forward, or does the act of trying to make it feel familiar immediately just feel a little derivative just because of that's the connection?
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, I'm not really looking at Shadow of the Dragon Queen really at all, outside of where it is in time and making sure that it's geographically different, in a different location than what's in the hardcovers, so that there's not any overlap there. That was really the only thing that I really looked at. Outside of that, though, most of the inspiration came from rereading the novels for the 50th time, and then going through the old DL modules, honestly, and I wanted to make it feel like what I remember, than what I fell in love with, really. And so I tried to give it as much of an old school feel as I could. Sometimes it can be brutal and it can be very unforgiving, and there are real dangers that the training wheels come off pretty quickly, especially not in this adventure, but in the next one, in Dragons of Destruction. That's tough. It can be war is hell is effectively one of the things that we're trying to get across, and is like war's no fun. And so, I mean, that's essentially the for Dragons of Divinity. It was what I wanted to do is it's on ramping people into the setting, right? Yeah. So introducing them to the world and the state of the world, and part of the state of the world was despair, and like they'd had this like intimate relationship with these divine beings, with the gods, intimate. Like, it's one of the things that I love, and it's beautiful about Dragonlance over the other settings, is that there's a real relationship between the adherents of the faith and their divine patron. It's really important. It's not just like you're not just a power source that I tap into to make the bad man fall down. I actually have to there's worshipfulness, and there is an adherence to a code and a philosophy that's really important in the relationship. And the gods of Krynn in particular are very meddlesome. They're very Grecian, like the Greek gods, in how much they meddle and they tamper, or they direct and have direct interactions, like literally face-to-face interactions with some of the mortals that are in there. And so that's another part of this Dragons of Divinity, was showing people how far Krynn had fallen away, and the why, some of the whys behind it. Like Krynn is essentially a fallen state. So it's not a post. It's a post-Eden almost, right? Like this post-apocalyptic fall, and like the shining sterling knights, they've fallen. The mages of high sorcery, no one trusts them. No one really trusted them anyway, but they trust them even less now, right? And the dwarves are in a fallen state. And so really a lot of this is just like, it's really setting the stage for the War of the Lance more than anything else. I feel like I tried very hard to make it feel very much like the AD&D Dragonlance that we knew.
I always found it interesting with Dragonlance because it does present that vibe through the novels and the original modules of that Greek god sort of pantheon and interplay with mortals. But you also sort of have to take a step back and realize that, your average person had zero connection with the gods. The king priest, who was supposed to be the most divine being ever, he was just shown signs. Fizban didn't knock at his door and rearrange his furniture. So they really aren't as involved as we like to think. They do their own thing, and when mortals happen to benefit or hinder them, that's when they,
Right, that's true.
Except for,
I
like,
think that's
the
a good
priest,
point. I think maybe that's a good point. Maybe it's more like there's whenever there are agents of their will, right? They have more interaction with the agents of their will, as opposed to, Bob the turnip farmer, in Kindermore or something like that, right?
To be fair, he did great turnips.
He did great work. His pickled beets are the best. They can't be touched. Yeah, I think that's that's a good distinction to make. I think you're right. It's probably like the mortal agents have like a direct, like Goldmoon had a direct, like a direct interaction, not with Mishakal
Yeah, but like
specifically,
even
right?
that this is what I love so much about it is that her the faithful, especially in the Age of Despair,
Mhm.
you know, we like to pretend like it's as if it was Goldmoon after the War of the Lance, but the truth
Mhm.
is Goldmoon had no idea what she was doing.
Yes.
She didn't even get the staff. It was her
Yeah.
man who got the staff.
Yeah.
And so she's just literally going off of faith, having zero clue about any
Yeah.
of it. And then when she finally does get the Dismissal, she hands it off
Yeah.
to
To
someone else. Like,
Elistan. Yeah.
I was gonna say El
Yeah.
Minister, and then I was gonna have people shouting at me.
I'm worried about that all the time. Like I agonize over the canon and over the lore and stuff like that because
Yeah.
I'm just waiting for somebody to throw tomatoes at me for
Right,
getting
right.
something wrong.
That's what I imagine when you were describing the Gen Con room full of
Oh my
Dragonlance
gosh.
fans. It's
Oh
just
man.
arguing over pronunciation.
Oh man. Yeah. Well, the
Important
pronunciation. Like we
characters.
have I didn't put this in the stuff that I sent to you, but I actually have a pronunciation guide, and I'm just waiting for somebody to post a review on DM's Guild. It's Paladin, not Paladine, or something like that.
Right,
Oh my
right,
god. Yeah.
right. People get crazy about it, but that's
Yep.
why we are the way we are. We have to love it.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm sorry. We're almost at the hour that I had
You're
planned
good.
on this, and we haven't even gotten into anything.
You're
So I'm
good.
just going
You're
to sort
good.
of thumb through some of these press pages that you have
Mhm.
presented here on the first and second module that are available right now on DM's Guild. If you guys want to go pick them up, you can do so. They also have virtual tabletop versions if you
Mhm.
want to run it virtually, which is very cool, I think.
Yep.
But you know, you can see they went through. First of all, I'm an advertising professional, and so graphic design wise, I really appreciate what you guys did here.
Yeah. Rich Lescaflair, the guy that behind um oh man, he made Esper Genesis.
Okay,
Is the guy that does the layout design for us. He's fantastic. And then all of our maps were made by Dungeon Baker, Neil Crabtree.
awesome.
Did all those really great stuff.
That's great. So the second one, this is always like the tough part, right? Whenever
Mhm.
you're doing like any type of series, you
Mhm.
have to think about escalation. You have to think about scope. You have to think about, well, what did they learn from the first one, and how is that going to inform this next one? I mean,
Mhm.
there's a lot that must go into it. And you having planned out 12, I can only imagine the crazy Sunny in Philadelphia
Oh yes.
board with strings and pin thumbtacks that you guys have.
I don't want anybody to see that because they'll take me away and put me in a padded room if they see that board.
You just have to move the camera 180
Don't
degrees.
zoom it up. Yeah, it's all right over here. Yeah, exactly.
So what was the most difficult aspect of creating the second adventure or helping guide the second adventure from the first?
So first of all, we knew that we needed an epic to start out with because we wanted an explosive opening, or I wanted an explosive opening. I like in movies and books, I want you to grab my attention and show me what the stakes are and how serious things are up front, instead of like this. There's a time and a place for a slow burn towards escalation, but I like the Star Wars crawl goes up, and then the Star Destroyer comes in behind the Leia's Corellian Corvette, and it's like there's this it's the big eye-popping opening, lots of laser beams flying all over the place. Darth Vader shows up, so I know how serious the state of the galaxy is for the first like 5 or 10 minutes of the movie.
Mhm.
And so the same thing happens here. So Dragons of Destruction revolves around the opening launch, or the red dragon armies launch into Solamnia from the east. So coming over from Throttle in particular, and Throttle Gap. Throt had fallen, and they moved into the east, or excuse me, into the west. And so this is no one's seen a dragon in 1,000+ years, right? And so they've all in they've been regaled to, or related, or they've all faded into obscurity and legend, right?
Yeah.
And so I knew it's like you have to start off with a dragon in this, because I don't like the last thing I need to hear is there aren't enough dragons in a Dragonlance story too, right?
Right.
But here's the thing though, one is enough. That's one of the things these days in other settings in D&D is that dragons are just kind of like, you just kind of like whittle your way through them over the course of an adventure, and it's really not that big a deal. Whereas dragons in Krynn are absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
Dragon fear is a very real thing and things like that. So it was all about having a really explosive opening, something really, really big. And then it's not as intimate or personal in the first adventure. It's more about the Solamnic army trying to maneuver towards the east, knowing what was coming for them. And then whenever they got there, they were they were unprepared for it. And so, really, one of the things that we got in the feedback in Dragons of Destruction that what I was worried about is it was going to be a downer ending because sometimes the forces of good don't win, and part of winning is surviving.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about in modern D&D, what we've seen a lot of is like, again, there's like a training wheel aspect of it where you want to make sure that people have a good time. You don't want them to lose all the time. But I see the importance in failure, and I see the importance in setting the stakes based on a failure so that you can come back from it, rise up, right? And so the first Dragons of Destruction is it's harrowing. It's a really, really hard, war as hell expression of Dragonlance, of how, like where the stakes actually are.
I love that. I love the fact that of consequences in games in general, but especially when you're talking about like a war-torn world that we're sort of being pushed into with the beginning of the War of the Lance and Dragonlance. I mean, it's, you know, real life war, anyone who's grown up in our generation where, you know, Vietnam was very much your father. You know, it's a personal, intimate relationship with the fallout of war and how it affects people. I have siblings who were affected because of the exposure to Agent Orange. I mean, that war genuinely is hell, but there's also a sort of an echo of war that extends beyond the actual conflict and genuinely affects human beings. One thing that I always loved about Dragonlance is that it set that side of it very much in front and center. It's not, you know, and that's sort of personified, I think, brilliantly through the dragon fear. Back when I was a kid playing D&D, you know, not AD&D or anything, but just the old box sets, you met a dragon, it was either a total party kill or, you know, you defeated the dragon. It wasn't like you were urinating down your leg in fright because there's this monstrosity. You're just like, all right, let's get it, boys. And you just jump in. I mean, that was on the cover of the box that I was playing of Dungeons & Dragons. With Dragonlance, you get the shadow of it going over you and you can't move.
Yeah.
Like, it's genuinely terrifying. You know, it's like you're just being thrown into trench warfare or something and you don't know how to act or react. I love that so much. And so I think it's a really great way.
Dinosaurs, you know, giant breathing dinosaurs should be terrifying. But then when you talk about, when you add into it the Dragonlance element, doesn't just make it a physiological or a psychological reaction. It's also, there's a magical effect. Like these are not just big lizard creatures. These are intelligent. Like there's like an element of divinity in them they were the first that were created, and so there's something that's incredibly fantastical about them and supernatural. That's probably the better way of looking at it. There's something supernatural about Krynnish dragons that sets them apart from the other dragons in the mythologies across the D&D cosmos.
Yeah, I love it so much. So this one's not on Roll20, or I'm sorry, DM's Guild yet. Dragons of Revelation. Is there anything that you can tell us about this?
Yeah, this is where the real launch point of the story is.
Okay.
So Divinity stages you for the War of the Lance. It gets you ready to play a Dragonlance game. Dragons of Destruction gets your attention. And it's essentially like, it's like the Divinity and Destruction are almost like extended session zeros, right? Where it's like everything is staging you up or getting you prepped for Dragons of Revelation, because that's effectively when it's the Pax Tharkus, or not Pax Tharkus. It's more of the Zaxaroth, right? It's like, this is where things are really like the story is really going to kick into gear at this point, and the stakes we find out are not as like the least of our worries right now was a hobgoblin horde from the east and into the west and one dragon. There's a lot more to it than just that. There's more of like a divine or a destiny element that's staged into it. And so this too, like with the Innfellows or the Heroes of the Lance, there's like a fate. Like you are a thread of fate. You're one of the stones that get dropped into the pond or into the river of time, and you see you are the part of the ripples that move across the waters. And so you're introduced to some key players in this in particular. And then essentially the MacGuffin, for those that are familiar with the term, the main element, not the Dragonlance or the Discs of Mishakal or anything like that, but like the main MacGuffin that you're going to be after in the rest of the adventures is springboarded here in Dragons of Revelation.
Cool. Well, I got to say, I'm not a big fan when it comes to playing other people's adventures. I like the idea of like official adventures. So like the original DLs, I love, I haven't personally run through them, but I love pulling story beats out of them to sort of interweave. Shadow of the Dragon Queen is the first official adventure that I've ever run in Dragonlance, because I've always just done sandbox Dragonlance games before. So it's very interesting sort of seeing the sensibilities from WotC and sort of twisting it to my own sensibilities, especially with character development and stuff. I'm actually really interested in running your adventures because of just our interaction now, just the way that you're describing what you put into crafting and architecting them, I think is very, very interesting. Before we head out, I've got a couple more questions if you're okay with.
I'm good. I got all the time you need. Go for it.
From the chat here. One is dragons, right? Obviously, it's Dragonlance. But part of what really makes Dragonlance great is, we were sort of tongue-in-cheek, laughing about it earlier. It's the fact that you do get to have an opportunity of riding a dragon in a war scenario. So do you have any flight mechanics, or do you address that aspect of it all when it comes to... I mean, I don't know if you're going to get to that point in your adventures at all, but have you ever thought about like flight movement of dragons in a sort of a tabletop scenario?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. We actually the last 4 adventures in the series are being the first 2 are being written now, and so the one that we're about to go into has that element in it. Right? I know not to give too much away, but like again, that was the other thing. I felt like there are certain parts to writing Dragonlance stories that if I didn't have an element in it, I was going to be mad at myself. Because like I want to be able to ride a dragon, and if I'm not going to have a lance or Dragonlance, at least I want to be able to ride something in flight, and I want to do like like aerial combat, right? So there's not a lot, unfortunately, in the DM's the DMG or anything like that in 5th edition for flight mechanics. So we had to get creative with some of the ways that we're doing it, almost like because the vibe that we were trying to go with is like a dogfight in World War II, right? So it is it's chasing after one another, and in order to try to create an advantageous position, or to use the landscape that you're skimming across to your advantage, right? It's going through a canyon and going around a turn and then turning around and breathing fire at them as they come across. So there are elements to that, but a lot of those things are more narrative driven, as opposed to specific mechanics on putting people out on grid paper or on hex maps or things like that, and saying I move here and then I put myself on top of these dice and this is how tall I am, or how far up I am, or where my elevation is, or things like that. So we've got some. We're working on it. Well, our best minds are on that right now, actually.
Top men.
Top.
So, I mean, of course, the other side of that is mass warfare. Now, we had battle system in AD&D, battle system 2E in AD&D 2E. I don't personally know if we had anything in 3rd edition. We were absent in 4th, and in 5th, we have Warriors of Krynn, which, the board game side of it, I think, is fun. It doesn't really deal with mass combat. It deals with the heroes during a mass combat. And then, of course, we have the way that they presented it if you didn't have the board game, which I think is personally a horrible way of dealing with mass combat, where you just have encounters that occur at a particular, initiative point. How do you deal with mass combat, if at all, in your modules?
We don't deal with mass combat yet. Mass combat typically comes in the form of multi-table events. The mass combat is that you've got 100 different people that are playing the same scenario, and they're all fighting a big boss monster, or they're trying to achieve a certain, like they're trying to take this hill. And in order to take this hill, they have to fight off this many goblins. And with multi-table events, the 16 tables that are playing the same adventure together, they have an individual DM that's running them, but then they also have an admin team that gets reported back to. So they're recording statistics about things that are happening at each one of the tables. Like, did they take this hill? Did they defend against this thing? Were they able to as these things are being checked off, then different branches open up in the story that may or may not have been there, depending upon what was achieved and what was not achieved, right? So whatever the win condition isn't as simple as we did the thing or not. There are different elements that are created or that are presented that some tables will do and some tables won't. Like in Dragons of Destruction, you can choose to go. There are essentially three different branches you can go down in the kind of decision tree of what your part of the army is going to end up doing. Mm-hmm. And depending on how that goes, you could get a different possible ending at the end, depending upon how successful or unsuccessful you were with it. Yeah. So it's like I said, it's a long way of saying that we don't have specific mass combat rules. We kind of have like the multi-table function that helps out with that quite a bit.
I can imagine that would get really clunky and difficult just based on pacing of different tables.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, yes, and the way that works is a lot of is you have to really push in the writing of it, and the admin notes or their GM notes about like you've got 1 hour to do this. So within this hour, these are essentially the high points of what you need to hit. Right, do this, and this, and as long as you can do that within the hour, and you're relaying this back to the admin team, then that's how you're able to stay within that block time. And so they're to varying degrees of success. Yeah. But most GMs that we have that are working on it right now, again, top men, that's the other thing the admins are doing too, is they're helping to keep them on time also. So you'll have an admin that'll walk around and say, hey, you got 15 minutes left, you got 10 minutes left. You're kind of giving them so that they know to speed up or to slow down depending upon how much time they've got left.
Yeah. And do you find that players are genuinely amenable to that sort of pacing?
I think the players understand that it's within the circumstances of what you're trying to do. Yeah. I think they do. I think that again, it depends on your team that's working on it to how organic and fluid that it is. Mm-hmm. If you've never run a multi-table event before, then and you're doing it cold to the best of your ability, you're gonna have a different dividend that's paid out over like a team like from Baldwin Games. That's what they do every month. They're running usually 10 epics over the course of the weekend at various times. So,
do you ever feel that do you run like personal, at home or virtual games in addition to the organized play games?
Oh yeah. I've got my regular Friday game with some friends of mine that I've known since high school. They act as my playtest team. So whenever an adventure comes in, I'll read through it. I'll make whatever my notes are, where I feel like my hot spots are in the adventure that need to really be vetted out, and then they go through it first. So they're always in the playtest credits for the adventures, and then I run not just for Baldwin Games, but also work with World of Game Design on games that are not just D&D, like Mothership, Achtung Cthulhu, a lot of the 2D20 stuff, Free League stuff. So,
okay, yeah, because I always wondered, like, if it became too much of a job, do you miss just the free-form storytelling side of it?
Yeah, I do. I think I love it, and I wouldn't change the opportunity at all. But it definitely there's a level of there is a job element to it, right? Because I'm not just doing it for me, right? I'm trying to meet the expectation of the community. I'm trying not to upset Margaret and Tracy or Douglas Niles or Mary Kirchhoff or anybody else that was on the original design team. I'm trying to, I put a lot of that on myself I just want to make the best possible thing that I can, not just for myself, but for them, right? Yeah. And for the community at large. So a lot of it just boils down to expectation and just trying to meet expectation out there though.
How do you get the feedback in that? I mean, do you feel like you're getting, if by taking such care and concern to live up to your own expectations of these people who sort of dip their toes in it in the first place, do you get some form of a feedback loop that lets you know that, yeah, you are on the right track and you feel fulfilled by doing that? Yeah. Or is it just this constant state of anticipation and animosity almost towards never getting anything, like maybe, I don't know, what is it?
Yeah, it's different. elements, right? So from a like, what's the feedback from the people that created it, right? I have not talked to Tracy about it. I sent him a message and said, hey, here, like, but when I first got the gig, I sent a message to him and Margaret and just said, hey, I wanted you to know that I'm working on this. I love the work that you did, and just I want to, if nothing else, just like wave me off and say that you're not mad at me.
Yeah.
If nothing else, right? It's like, don't mess my stuff up. I didn't get anything back from Tracy, which that's fine. I did get some back and forth from Margaret, who was very, very gracious and very, very kind. Yeah. And really essentially what she said was, it's in the hands of the fans. You know, that like they took it as far as they're going to take it. These next 3 books are what they're going to write, and I don't think she's holding any grudges. You know, she like if she know, for her at least, and I think this is essentially what I gleaned from it is, the intentions are pure. They're doing the best that you can. That's all anybody could ever ask for. Yeah. You know, so from the original design team, I think that's about the best you're going to end up getting, because part of it too is like being protective about, you know, stepping in the wrong element. You know, the recent drama that they had with Wizards of the Coast and all that stuff. I know that they're probably pretty tight-lipped as a result of that too. But and then the community has been really positive. Like I've heard, like, if there's any negative feedback, it is like nitpicks, or it is like, I didn't really think this part was a little bit clunky and it didn't work. But what'll typically happen is I thrive on feedback. If you're nice about it, don't be a jerk. I probably won't take any of your advice if your input, if you're being a jerk about it. But if you're at least saying like, this thing didn't work for me at my table, I'll go back and I'll look at it and be like, yeah, that probably didn't work. And it hasn't gone to DM's Guild yet. So there's some time. We can go in there, we can kind of noodle with it a little bit and make it work. But so far, the community's been really, really positive about it. The people that have played it have really enjoyed it. The best compliment I've gotten so far has nothing to do necessarily with somebody saying, hey, I read your adventure or played in your adventure and it was awesome. It was, hey, I just finished your adventure. Tell me more about Dragonlance and what do I need to read first? I'm like, oh, that's the best. Like, brother, how much time do you have? Is the question I have to ask them. So
just do a big inhale.
Yeah,
they're like,
exactly.
Oh, I'm sorry I asked.
And then I think the other element is not just the players, but then it's who's running them, because that's really my audience. Yeah. That's my direct audience, or the people that are reading through the modules. Is it readable? Is it enjoyable? Are you relating to it? Is it fun to run? And so far, so good on that aspect too. It's been pretty positive so far.
I'm not sure what in chat. There's a bunch of AI comments coming through. I appreciate you tuning in, but I have no idea what you're talking about. So that's all I can go with that.
Skynet.
Yeah.
Skynet.
Yeah, it's real. It's here.
It's coming.
I mean, ultimately, I think as long as it's coming from a position of, I want to tell a great Dragonlance story, this is a setting that I dearly care about, and I want to expose other people to it, then that's all that matters. I think as human beings in general, and this goes for literally any human in any given situation, learning how to give and take constructive criticism is the most important thing you can do in life, because we have to engage with other humans on this planet, and learning how to do that in a, if not professional, at least in a respectful way, is the most important thing. And no one has ever said in this world that I know of that you have to play D&D or Dragonlance games my way. Play them how you want to play them, in the way that you enjoy playing them. And that's all that's important, because it's the setting itself that is beautiful and that we can all enjoy. We don't have to see eye to eye in every avenue of every aspect of it.
Absolutely.
That being said, you're doing it wrong. No, I'm just kidding.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
How do you feel about we talked a little bit about it. I mean, we emailed back and forth just really, really briefly about it. But how do you feel 5e lives up to your expectations of Dragonlance when it comes to novels and the game products that have come before it? Do you feel like it caters to that Dragonlance tone and vibe, or is it incumbent upon the dungeon master to make it feel that way?
Yeah, I think that no matter which setting that you're playing in, the books can only the setting material can only give you so much. I think with Dragonlance, it was a quick guide to Dragonlance. It's about the best that you were going to end up getting out of it. There are elements of it that I liked, and some things that I didn't like. Like I'm not a huge fan. I think I've gone on the record before of feats for designating or the elements of
right, the
knighthood
organization,
or
yeah.
the organizations and factions and things like that. I thought that was a miss. I think that was really just kind of like we're trying to design the new edition of D&D, and we're going to use Dragonlance as a kind of like a testing ground for it to see whether people hate it or love it. And so I don't know how successful that was for him, but it's not my favorite element of it, that's for sure. I think too that using the wow, the biggest miss though was how they incorporated the 3 moons of magic. They didn't.
Yeah.
They didn't, right? It's like they did kind of with the lunar sorcerer, but that's not it. Like all magic, all arcane magic on Krynn is derived from the three moons, or from the 3 gods of magic. And so like how the waxing and waning of the moons and where they are in their cycle and how they're aligned and things like that, those are all key elements. And that's actually one of the things I really wanted to incorporate in the organized play aspect, but there were certain they would have let me build out a full mechanic for it, but it's something that would have had to been it is separate from the hardcover, and it's hard to incorporate like a full new mechanic that's going to have to carry for the next 12 sessions that isn't coupled with something that's already out there. So unfortunately, that was one of the designs that I didn't get to. I wish I could have done it, but I didn't have the time. Was part of it. It was just time and like trying to bolt it in. It was something we'd have to have in every single adventure. It's like another page or two on lunar magic and how it works. And that's if nobody's played in the setting before, they have to pick up a new rule that they didn't have in the player's handbook or in Tasha's guide to whatever. So we had to.
Did you ever consider using some of those other Dragonlance fan organizations, publications as reference point for those?
Yeah, I've talked with Trampus Whitman and some of the folks over at Dragonlance Nexus. Love Trampus. So I've even talked to the Splinterverse guys about some of the work that they worked on too. In this though, part of this is it has to stay in-house. That we can't use DM's Guild material because part of this, I did that intentionally too, right? It's like they should have their own contribution to it that is distinct, and that's part of the selling point for their material. And then they can bolt it in if they want to, but Adventurers League is an all or nothing thing. Whatever you end up running, it has to be as close to. Part of our rules are dictated by Wizards of the Coast's admins. Also, it's like here are the elements of Dragonlance that are distinct, and here's how the rules are a little bit different. Wizards of the Coast indicates that to us, as opposed to us being able to use third-party material.
Okay. I guess by way of sort of closing down our conversation, as this last sort of question here from the community, are you able to give us any hints on maybe a big name that we might be familiar with that might show up in some of your...
Oh, man. Yeah.
If it spoils something, don't do it, but...
let me think about this for a second. Okay, so in this, then one of the adventures that are being written right now, there is, oh man, how do I do this without spoiling it?
Can you hint around it?
There is a very important relationship. There's a power couple.
Okay.
That's in it. Wink.
Yep.
That's in it. Yeah.
Yep. I think I know
power
exactly
couple.
what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay. Well, this has been a lot of fun, John. Thank you so much for coming on and just sort of riffing about a little bit of everything, really.
Everything. But I'm telling you, I love it. I could do it all day long. I don't get to do it nearly enough.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your time. I would highly recommend anyone to go out there if you want to run some modules that are really sort of bite-sized 4-hour chunks that go into a grand campaign. Take a look at the Vault of the Undying series that they're putting out. John, where can people find you online, or what's the best places they can sort of look for this stuff?
Yeah, you can find me. I'm actually one of the co-hosts of the Cant podcast. We record on stream at 9 p.m. on Sunday nights and Tuesday nights. So we have, like, in about 4 hours from now, or no, 2.5 hours, I'll be streaming on Twitch through WotC Live, World of Game Design. And so that's Cant is the name of the podcast. For me, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Facebook, usually under Dwarven DM. It's kind of where my roots came from in organized play. So that's what most people know me by. Those are your best places to find me. Or DM's Guild, Baldwin Games. That's the good stuff right there.
Awesome. So Dwarven DM, what's your sub race?
Oh, buddy, let me tell you, probably Hill Dwarf, because I'm too nice to be a stuffy mountain dwarf. Yeah.
I dig it, man.
And if I'm going to be one of the dwarves, I'm totally Kaolin. Thorbarden are the worst. They are the worst dwarves, man.
They closed the doors, man.
A bunch of jerks, man. The Kaolin were cool, man. They were like super nice, and By the way, shout out to the Kaolin dwarves. They're actually in the adventures too.
Oh,
They're
cool.
easily my favorite of the dwarven races. So
Awesome.
or great dwarven kingdoms.
Yeah.
We'll say
Yeah. South of Solamnia there, people.
Right on, represent.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a wonderful evening. Good luck with everything that you're doing out there, and I genuinely appreciate you taking time with
Oh,
me.
hey, are you kidding me? Thank you for keeping the fires lit. I told Adam before we got started, I'm a fan. So I'm tickled to be a part of it. So thank you for what you're doing. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. That is going to do it. That's all the time we have to talk about Dragonlance and, of course, the incredible creator, John Christian. What do you all watching this think of his work? Would you like to see his adventures in an edition other than 5th? You can always leave a comment in the comments below. If you join live, throw it in the chat there, or feel free to email me at info@dlsaga.com or hunt down John online in all those places that he already mentioned. I would like to take a moment and remind you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. Click that bell to get notified about upcoming videos, and click the like button. All of that goes to help other Dragonlance fans learn about this channel and its content. And of course, this channel is all about celebrating the wonderful world of the Dragonlance Saga. So thank you all so much for joining in that celebration. So for John and myself, until next time, Salam Javar.